The cameras started rolling. The audience held its breath, and the world watched in silence, sensing that what was about to unfold between Neil deGrasse Tyson and Jonathan Roumie would be more than just a televised interview. This was not a debate. It was a collision of two visions of the future. One stage, two icons. Two men who had, each in their own way, changed how we see the world. On one side, Neil deGrasse Tyson, the celebrated astrophysicist who made the cosmos accessible to millions, the man who turned science into storytelling and inspired a new generation of thinkers. On the other, Jonathan Roumie, the actor whose portrayal of Jesus in The Chosen had touched hearts across the globe, a man who stepped far beyond performance to become a quiet voice of faith, hope, and spiritual awakening in a world starved for meaning. The setting felt cordial, even elegant. The veteran journalist leaned toward the microphone with practiced calm. "Mr. Tyson, you've helped millions grasp the wonders of the universe. Mr. Roumie, you've reshaped how people perceive faith and purpose in modern times. What drives men like you?" The air shimmered with anticipation. The studio lights lit every corner, but they couldn't dissolve the invisible tension thickening by the second. Face to face, Tyson, the man who explores the galaxies with equations and question. Roumie, the man who evokes stillness in a noisy world. Both powerful, both admired, but holding radically different compasses for what it means to lead, to teach, to build something lasting. The journalist, seasoned by decades of high-stakes interviews, tried to keep his tone measured as he leaned in. "Tyson, you've changed how we understand the stars. Mr. Roumie, you've broken paradigms of spiritual storytelling in the 21st century. Two fields, two paths, one question. What compels you to keep challenging the status quo?" Tyson smiled, that confident grin that had disarmed countless critics. "I believe in progress," he said plainly, "in constant motion. The world doesn't evolve by playing it safe. Sometimes breaking the rules is the only way to move forward." The audience, mostly young, ambitious creators and thinkers, erupted in applause. But Roumie didn't join them. He simply looked at Tyson, hands calmly folded, elbows resting on the table, like a man about to speak not to impress, but to reveal. "I believe in progress too," he said, voice firm yet serene. "But there's a very thin line between moving forward and trampling over others as you do." Tyson tilted his head, slightly intrigued. Roumie continued softly but without hesitation. "When a leader becomes convinced that only his vision matters, he begins to forget those around him, those who build with him, those who believe in him." The room fell into a sudden, weighty silence. The contrast between them was undeniable. Science and soul, data and discernment, forward motion and reflective pause. "Are you suggesting I've forgotten my people?" Tyson asked, with a tilted smile and a subtle edge in his voice. Roumie met his gaze directly, unflinching. "I'm saying that success, when built without respect for those who make it possible, isn't success. It's arrogance wearing a mask of victory." A low murmur swept through the studio. Some nodded slowly, others sat stunned. It was clear Jonathan Roumie hadn't come to flatter anyone. "May I share a story?" he added suddenly, his tone deepening. Tyson leaned back, curious. The journalist gave a slight nod. The audience froze. "There once was a man," Roumie began, "who climbed so fast that he never looked down. He only wanted to go higher, reach farther. Every brick in his empire was laid by unseen hands, workers, friends, dreamers, believers, but he didn't see them, didn't hear them. He just kept climbing. To be continued. Those who believed in him, he never saw them, never heard them. He just kept climbing." Roumie's voice fell silent. A long, heavy pause seized the studio. You could hear the shallow breathing of the audience. Nothing else. And then, he said the words that landed like a quiet thunder. "And when he finally bothered to look down, there was no one left to catch him if he fell." The room froze. Neil deGrasse Tyson for a moment had no answer. His smile faded, not out of defeat but out of genuine uncertainty. He was used to technical debates, to dismantling arguments with logic. But this wasn't a matter of science, this was a moral reckoning. The journalist, sensing the shift, stepped in gently. "Gentlemen, let's try to keep things civil." But Roumie wasn't raising his voice. He wasn't provoking. He was planting a seed, and he wouldn't leave it half-buried. "I'm not here to lecture you, Neil," Jonathan said, calm as ever. "I'm here because I believe that power without conscience eventually destroys even the brightest among us. And you, Neil, you are brilliant, but you're also human like the rest of us." The audience didn't know whether to applaud, stay silent, or just keep breathing. Because in a few sentences, Roumie had reframed the entire conversation. It was no longer about progress. It was about direction and companionship. It was about whether greatness meant leaving others behind. Tyson shifted in his seat, crossing his arms with a mix of curiosity and self-defense. He was no stranger to criticism, even to hostility. But this wasn't a challenge to his intellect. This was an appeal to something far deeper. "That's profound," Neil said with his usual composed tone, though tighter now. "But if everyone waited until the world was ready to change, we'd still be living in caves." A few soft laughs rose from the crowd. Tyson leaned into the moment, seizing the rhythm. "Real innovation doesn't ask for permission. It just happens. I didn't get here by worrying about who laid the bricks. I draw the blueprint. I shape the vision. If I stop to check every single step, I lose momentum." Roumie listened in silence, nodding slowly, not in agreement, but in recognition, as if he'd heard these words before, as if he knew exactly how this argument would unfold. Tyson leaned forward, eyes sharp now. "I break limits. I take risks. I do things others wouldn't even dare to imagine. If we all played by the rules, creativity would suffocate." And then Roumie asked, softly, precisely, "And who decides which rules deserve to be broken?" Tyson blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the speed and depth of the question. Roumie wasn't loud. He didn't point fingers. But every word he spoke landed like a weighted truth. "You do, the ones with power. Because when change is forced without listening, it's not evolution. It's arrogance." The room went still again. Only Roumie's voice remained, calm, unwavering. "I've broken rules too, Neil. I've challenged conventions, taken risks that people mocked. Not for headlines, but because I believe they mattered. But there's one thing I've never done. I've never forgotten who pays the price when things go wrong." Tyson's expression hardened, just slightly. "Are you saying I forget that?" Roumie didn't answer right away. He let the silence speak. Then with a tone lower but even firmer, he asked, "How many of the minds who helped you build your career are still standing beside you today?" A ripple of murmurs moved through the studio. Everyone knew it, even if no one usually said it aloud. Turnover at Tyson's institutions and projects was high. Some left with pride, others with bitterness. It wasn't a secret, but it was rarely spoken directly to him. Neil didn't answer. He simply clenched his jaw. For the first time in years, he was being confronted not for his ideas, but for his ethics. Roumie leaned forward just slightly, his eyes still fixed on Neil's. "You can be the architect of the future. You can map galaxies, decode dark matter, even reshape how we understand consciousness. But if you forget the people who stood by you when no one else did, then you're not building a legacy at all. You're building a tower." He paused. "And believe me, no one wants to die alone at the top." The audience was silent, utterly still. No shifting, no whispers. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a duel, not of egos, but of truths. Neil brought a hand to his chin, deep in thought. It was clear he had felt the weight of the moment, but he wasn't yet sure how to respond. Then with a trace of sarcasm in his voice, he asked, "And you, Jonathan, you've never made mistakes? Never lost people along the way?" Roumie nodded without hesitation. "Of course I have. I've failed. I've had to apologize. I've lost people, sometimes good people. But every time that happened, I made it a point to stop, to look back, and to make it right. Because that's the only way anything we build stays standing." There was no anger in his voice, only conviction. And in that moment, it became painfully clear. This wasn't a tech versus faith debate. This was something far more human. The silence was so dense, it felt like time had paused. The cameras kept rolling, but even the studio crew didn't dare move. Everyone was waiting for the same thing, Neil deGrasse Tyson's answer. But he wasn't the same man who had started this interview. The posture that had once radiated relaxed dominance was now guarded, contained. His confident smile was gone. And in its place, doubt, reflection, maybe even humility. Finally, he spoke, softer now, more real. "So you think I should slow down? Play it safe?" Roumie looked at him with a rare blend of firmness and compassion. He shook his head slowly, like a teacher still hoping that his student might understand. "I'm not telling you to stop chasing your vision, Neil. I'm saying speed isn't everything. Moving forward without looking around or behind might feel efficient, but it can also be blind." The tension between them had shifted. It was no longer a clash of egos. It had become something else entirely. A conversation between two men with real power, talking about the invisible consequences of the paths they had chosen. Neil took a long breath. You could see him processing every word. He had dominated boardrooms, scientific panels, and talk shows with ease. But this was different. Look, he said quietly, stripped of performance. I've spent most of my life facing forward. There's always another challenge, another idea, another frontier. I move fast. I innovate. I don't stop. That's how I survive. Roumie didn't let the silence settle. And what happens, he asked gently, when you move so fast that you forget who you've left behind? Neil's gaze dropped. His fingers began to tap nervously on the armrest of his chair. There was no immediate reply, only the sound of a truth he may have spent years avoiding. Roumie leaned in slightly, his voice just above a whisper. I've met men like you, Neil. Brilliant minds, visionaries. Some changed the world. Others got lost in it. He paused. And those who got lost, it wasn't because their ideas failed. It was because they forgot something. A longer pause now. They forgot that the world doesn't change through science alone. It changes through people, through connection, through purpose. For the first time in a long while, Neil's expression softened. The tension in his shoulders loosened. A gentle, almost shy laugh escaped his lips. And you think that's what I'm missing? Purpose, Wawish? Roumie held his gaze. I think you have more vision than most, but you're missing something just as important. Connection. The audience didn't erupt. They didn't move. Because what they were witnessing wasn't staged. It wasn't rehearsed. It was real. Neil deGrasse Tyson, the man who had colonized the public imagination with wonder and science, was listening. And then came the sentence that would change everything. Roumie's voice dropped low and clear. Even the most impressive empire is nothing more than a house of cards if it has no solid foundation. And Neil, foundations aren't made of steel or algorithms. They're made of people. The words didn't thunder. They didn't scream, but they landed like a truth long overdue. The audience shifted. Some nodded slowly. Others blinked back tears. Even the journalists who had remained neutral all along now sat quietly moved. This wasn't the climax of a debate. It was the unveiling of a deeper reality. Neil lifted his eyes, and for the first time, he didn't speak to defend. He spoke to understand. Maybe I haven't looked back enough, he whispered. Roumie nodded once. The lesson had been offered. Neil sat in silence a few seconds longer, breathing slowly. Each word he'd heard was still echoing in his tremendous. He was no longer the bold, untouchable intellect who had opened the show with quips and certainty. Now he sat across from a mirror, and it wasn't his reflection he saw, but the consequences of his journey. I've spent my whole life moving forward, he said finally. There was always something new to build, to solve, to chase, but I never stopped to think about who was coming with me. His voice carried no guilt, only honesty, and with that, something shifted. Neil's words weren't spoken with guilt, but with an honesty so raw it dissolved any last wall between them. Jonathan Roumie looked at him with the serenity of someone who wasn't chasing applause, only truth, even when it hurt. There's nothing wrong with moving fast, Roumie said with a soft smile. What's dangerous is running so fast that you don't realize you've ended up alone. The silence that followed wasn't like the earlier silences. This one was reverent. It was the kind of silence that follows something real, the kind that doesn't require a script or music or applause, the kind that means something changed. Even the journalist, a man who had moderated countless interviews with presidents, scientists, and CEOs, had to swallow the lump in his throat before speaking. This wasn't just an interview, he finally said. It was a lesson in leadership, in vision, and in humanity. Neil deGrasse Tyson slowly turned toward Roumie. Then after a brief pause, he extended his hand. I respect you, he said, voice low and sincere. Not just for what you've done, but for what you represent. Roumie didn't hesitate. He reached out, gripped Tyson's hand firmly, looked him directly in the eyes. Respect isn't imposed, he replied. It's earned, and you've just taken a step toward earning it. And for a moment, they stood like that. Two figures from different worlds, one a scientist of galaxies, the other a quiet engineer of the soul. But in truth, both of them were building something far greater than careers or reputations. They were building legacy. The audience, which had held back for so long, finally let go. But it wasn't the explosive applause of a show. It was deeper, slower, a wave of recognition. They weren't applauding the spectacle. They were applauding the awakening. Because what Jonathan Roumie had said to Neil deGrasse Tyson wasn't just for him. It was for all of us. For everyone who had ever run too fast. who had ever believed that moving forward was enough, no matter who was left behind. And in that moment, something became unmistakably clear. True success isn't reaching the top first. It's reaching it together. The camera zoomed in, two men standing, two hands joined. A conversation that wasn't about winning, but about understanding. And when the studio lights finally dimmed, the world wasn't talking about an interview anymore. It was talking about a lesson no one expected, but everyone needed. If this story made you pause, if it stirred something inside you, even just a little, then you know this wasn't just an interview. It was a reflection on leadership, on humility, and on what it truly means to build something that lasts. If you believe the world needs more conversations like this, subscribe to the channel.